I could say this, I'm never comfortable. That's a philosophy that I think it was been a key to my success, and that I would say to if you want to be a successful leader. And if I look back at different times of my leadership journey where I've probably fallen down or failed the men and women below me, it was because I was comfortable.
Hi, I'm Nick Warner. As a dad, a lucky husband, and as a business coach, I value people and relationships above all else. But next is winning, sustainability, and healthy culture. I've been a business owner for 25 years and served for decades as a special advisor to business and government leaders at all levels. Let's just say I've seen some stuff. My passion and my expertise are helping motivated professionals and businesses find the highest level confluence of what they want in life and business. This is what it feels like to be together at the top. Our sincere thank you to our sponsors, the law firm of Scholes, Brick & Rogaski, Gene Hiller Menswear, Kathy Olson at Ships and Trips, and Three Bridges Consulting. Wayne Wu is the sheriff, the actual elected sheriff in Placer County, a growing suburban county in Northern California, bordering Sacramento to the west and Lake Tahoe to the east. Wayne oversees an agency budget just under $200 million with roughly 750 employees, both sheriff deputies and professional staff so vital to the organization. Unlike most elected positions, being the county sheriff is on a short list of elected positions that come with executive level responsibility. This show is about leadership and business management, and our goal is to learn from your experience as sheriff, especially starting from the ground floor and now being the top executive of a rather large organization. It's so fun to have you with us. Sheriff Wayne Wu, welcome, and please say hello to the people of Together at the Top.
Good morning. Thanks, Nick, for the invitation, and good morning to everybody listening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I promise I'll cover weightier topics, Sheriff, but I'm struck by the fact that you list your hobbies on your professional website. I love that. You have 750 employees and a front page News at 11 job, and you're telling people, hey, I'm a human. I have 3 kids, 2 grandkids, and I like to hike and bike and be a crappy golfer sometimes too. Sorry, Sheriff.
A very crappy golfer.
Why do you include that in your publicly available info when so many others wouldn't even think of it?
You know, I think you touched on it at the beginning of your question, especially in the profession of law enforcement, not just as an executive of an organization, is that, you know, we are all human beings as well. And there is life outside of the uniform and outside of the workplace. And I think that's really a problem our profession's having right now, is humanizing the badge. So, you know, I try to make sure that I include a little personal fun facts about myself to just kind of have that personal touch.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's in the space of, do we just talk about sustainability and family balance, or do we model the behavior we know will keep our people sane and alive?
Yeah, which is especially important in law enforcement these days. You know, employee wellness is really one of the top issues facing our profession.
I wasn't expecting to ask you this, but is it soft to take time with your family, or for, I mean, I don't want to say mental health in a bad way, but just to be a happy, well-adjusted human being? Is that soft like it might have been in past generations, or is it smart?
I think it's smart. It's necessary. And yeah, you know, law enforcement has seen a lot of dramatic changes over the last, well, I'm in my 34th year, so I've been in this profession over 3 decades. And when I started, it was definitely the generation of rub some dirt on it, son, and we'll see you in the morning back at the office. And it's not that way anymore. And I think it leads to better outcomes, better service to our community, and healthier employees. So, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there's a huge focus right now on wellness for first responders and specifically law enforcement. And you have to have that work-life balance. This job has a way to, you know, change people's perspectives on society, perhaps make you jaded and judgmental, and you have to have that decompression time in order to have a healthy, long career.
Yeah, as a citizen, I say thank you for that mindset, and thank you for, you know, I guess putting your money where your mouth is and supporting it, modeling it, and encouraging it. I'm the podcast host, and I prefer to do the transitions, but you mentioned 34 years, so let's go backward. At Together at the Top, we love us a good crooked road success story. So many successful people, without regard to what industry they work in, start out doing one thing and end up doing a whole different thing. I think you're in that category. Your parents are first-generation immigrants from China, but they're also business people all the way, and it turns out. Tell us about how your leadership journey evolved from your family owning the Capri Market in suburban Sacramento during your formative years to pivoting to law enforcement. Set it up for us, Wayne. Allow us to learn from you. How the heck did you get from here to there?
I often reflect back and I ask myself the same question. How the heck did I get from here to there? But there's always that nature versus nurture argument. And I do reflect a lot on my formative years as being keys to my success today. But the ironic thing is, growing up, I was never interested in law enforcement. It was never on my radar. I kind of stumbled into this profession, ironically. So going way back, yeah, my father was an immigrant from China. He came to this country about the age of 12. Settled in a area outside of Sacramento called Orangevale. Went to school there, learned the language after high school, and he was a pretty remarkable man. He had a way to create relationships with people, which if you go back to the day and age when he was going through high school in a rural area of Sacramento, I think one of the things I like to brag about with my father is he was elected student body president at San Juan High School in his senior year, which I think is remarkable for an immigrant that didn't speak English at that time. And I think he was probably the only minority in his high school. But after that, he served in the United States Army, came home, and he and his brothers invested, took a chance, and created what you already called out, the Capri Market in Orangevale. So growing up, I grew up in a very hardworking, small business immigrant family. And ironically, like I said, 34 years, I've done this job pretty much my entire adult life. But those foundational building blocks of growing up in my family's business, watching my parents work 6, 7 days a week, numerous long 12-hour days, and that small business mindset, it definitely are the foundation for my thought process and reflect now as a manager coming up to the organization and now as the lead executive.
I was going to ask you what were some of the things that stuck with you most from your small business experience, and you talk a lot about work ethic primarily. What about customer service?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that was the business we were in, right? Customer service. And went through the struggles in the 80s when chain grocery stores moved into the area of Orangevale. Our family's business had to close. And my father took his share and he invested in a 7-Eleven franchise. And then that grew to 3 more franchises. So, we had 3 7-Elevens that we ran. And both from the grocery store to 7-Eleven, it was all about customer service. But I think as I reflect back, especially to the grocery store days in Orangevale, it was more than just customer service. It was also connection to community. It was one of the main supermarkets and grocery stores. It was a cornerstone of the community. And I watched as my family helped numerous families in the community when they were down on their luck and didn't have food. And my family would let them take their groceries without paying, run up a tab, say, pay us, when you can afford it, we understand. And I think those also, as I reflect back now as an executive and as an adult, had an impact and an impression on me with that sense of service to others and connection to community as well.
Yeah, I really like the service to community. I hadn't thought about that. I definitely thought about customer service, but service to community, was that maybe the first time you felt that inkling of, I don't know, something larger, something bigger, if that's the right way to say it?
I think so. I remember as watching the impact when those types of things would happen, and people, they were embarrassed when they needed to ask for help, and I remember feeling just a sense of pride for my family being able to help others. So I don't think I realized it then. As an adult now, as you reflect back, I realize it now.
Yeah, that's really cool. To be honest with you, I really like that a lot, the origin story. On that same topic, or at least moving from small business to government, when we interviewed Anthony Williams, who at the time was the policy director for Amazon and also a former governor's cabinet secretary, chief of staff to the Senate, we got on the same topic of should government run like a business? And he said government's not supposed to run like a business. I tend to agree with him, but I'd love to get your informed thoughts. I view you as exceedingly sharp and modern as an employer, and you're also an experienced realist with, like we talked about, a small business upbringing. What are your thoughts about government running like a business, and what areas can we do better in the public sector being more like a business?
Yeah, I would agree with your previous guest to an extent. My saying ever since I got into government was if we were a business, we would be out of business quickly. And I think where government can take away from private business is efficiencies. There's a lot of bureaucracy and waste. And, I feel like sometimes it's easy to lose perspective that these are taxpayer dollars that we're responsible for. And I think in government, there's too much inefficiencies and too much waste. And I think that's where we can take a lesson from business. I think we can also take a lesson from business as you rise to higher executive levels, like, in the management ranks or the level I'm in. But on the flip side, it's not like you said, it's not supposed to run like a business. We are in the service industry. We provide a service, unlike businesses. A lot of businesses provide services, but we don't manufacture anything. We don't make widgets. We're in the people business. Most of our expenses are our employees that provide a service to the public. And sometimes it's hard to measure that, right? Crime rates are one way, but those aren't always accurate. You can't track crimes that you prevented.
Yeah, with your indulgence, Sheriff, I'd like to go back to your parents being from China for a moment. I find that remarkable right away and really, really cool. That distinction puts you in a very small minority of Asian Americans in law enforcement ranks. I'm not sure if you know this, but according to Axios.com, Asian Americans make up only 2.2% of the nation's law enforcement officers. What do you make of that? And what would you have leaders and emerging leaders behind you know about your experiences, especially when you throw in that Placer County is not particularly diverse?
No, it is interesting, and I think some of that is culture. I will say this, reflecting back on when I made the decision to go into law enforcement, I was 19 years old, and there is at the time I previously mentioned, my family had 3 7-Eleven franchises, and I think culturally it's kind of expected that the males are going to take on the family business, right? You work from the family business, and you eventually take over the family business. So honestly, I didn't have a whole lot of support from my father when I decided I was going to go into law enforcement. He didn't think it was the best idea.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, he came around, obviously, right? And I had a successful career. And before he passed away, he was very proud of me and came around. But I can remember still to this day those initial conversations and I was the first one in any of my family or extended family to go into law enforcement or really any type of government service. So it was kind of an interesting time, I think, in my life and an interesting, unexpected turn of events for my family and my parents.
So 2.2% of Asian Americans in law enforcement, that would surprise me. It may not be as salient or as relevant in the county wide, but it's probably relevant between your ears and certainly relevant nationally. Any advanced thoughts on how you've experienced it or, meaning or even, I guess, potentially lack thereof in your career or your agency?
I think in Placer County, like you mentioned, we're not super diverse just in our community. I think the demographics of our organization pretty well match the demographics of our county. But when you look right next door, the city of Sacramento, which, we border Sacramento County, that's one of the most diverse areas around the state of California or the country. And I would be curious to know, and I am a member of the Asian Peace Officers Association, the Sacramento region, what the percentage in our region is. While Placer County, I don't think we have a real high percentage of Asian American peace officers. I think in the Sacramento region, the Sacramento area, I'd be curious to see if it was a little higher than that 2 or 3%. But it's not completely surprising to hear that it's that low for me.
67% nationally, white police officers in the U.S. I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I think some of that is culture.
Yeah. Like so many agencies and private companies, you employ different levels and categories of professionals. So many organizations I start working with present haves and have-nots. The boss has favorites based on his or her experiences. The pay scale shows differences, and some feel, as you might imagine, much more important than others. A large sheriff agency like yours is set up for this dynamic of us versus thems and have versus have-nots. Yet everyone comes to work and has the same darn agency patch or badge, as the case may be. What are your feelings about team sport, one team, and what are you doing to cultivate that or combat internal division to get to that team sport?
Yeah, I think what you touch on is not uncommon in any industry, right? Whether it's the tech industry or law enforcement, when you have your line staff and then you have your executive or your management team. And in law enforcement, it can probably be even more of a problem because we're a paramilitary organization. So you do have a very stringent rank structure and a chain of command that is followed maybe more than it is in the private sector. I think some of the things we do is we really promote and adhere to our core values. And I think one of the other things we do pretty well, and I don't think any business or leadership team can do enough, is employee engagement. We're always looking for other ways to engage with our employees, almost like what you said at the beginning, right? Where you humanize yourself as a profession, as a leader to the community or to others in the organization. I think that's extremely important for our management staff When I mentioned our core values, we reinforce them. They're reinforced at promotion time. They're reinforced. I go over them every swearing in ceremony, and they specifically have tenets in there like, management and subordinates will be held mutually accountable for their actions. Because I think that's also one of those perceptions that'll permeate in any organization, whether it's law enforcement or not, that it's a do as I say, not as I do culture. And so it's extremely important for our management team to always set the example. And I tell them, not only are they held mutually accountable as our line staff, they're held more accountable. They're leaders in the organization. They need to be setting the example, and they know better. They've been around long enough. So, it's really just part of being that team and good teamwork.
What about the distinction or difference between professionalized staff and, as you call in the business, sworn staff, which are officers essentially?
I think that's a struggle that every law enforcement organization faces. I was hired in 1994 before Sheriff Ed Bonner was hired. And, there were sayings back then in our organization, not sworn, not born.
Wow.
It really minimizes the impact and the contributions of, I think, our professional staff who really make up half of our organization. And we can't do the job without them. So it's a constant battle to overcome those perceptions. Some of the things we do to overcome that is when I mentioned the swearing in ceremony, those aren't just for sworn peace officers. Every 6 months, we have a swearing in ceremony for all new employees and all promotions. And everybody shows up for that, whether it's an administrative legal clerk, a dispatcher, an evidence technician. And we often use an analogy that the sheriff's office is like an aircraft carrier. The deputy sheriffs out on patrol might be what you would visualize as the fighter jets that are maybe more of the sexy, glamorous jobs. But there's thousands of people below deck, and those jets wouldn't be able to take off or fulfill their mission without them, that everybody is mission critical. And the sheriff's office wouldn't function without all of those wonderful professional staff supporting the mission. And I think nothing showed that more than going through the pandemic, as everybody had to work from home, even professional staff, the sheriff's office, to fulfill our public safety mission. Everybody had to come to work still. And they did. They were just as dedicated as those deputies out on the street. And I'm extremely proud of them.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. We see that in the private sector too. It's not just public sector. We see, the sales staff feeling a certain way about fleet, and fleet feeling a certain way about inside sales, and inside sales feeling a certain way about product development, and engineers being frustrated with the salespeople because of the pricing. And it's all, it's somebody up top saying, hey, aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Peaches. We're all one team, essentially. I really, really like that analogy, but it's not just the public sector. It's private sector too. And it's really, frankly, I think as a leader, and sometimes the leader, it's cancerous. I will not have it on my watch. If that's your mindset, we got to talk. You got to get over that. We're a team, and it's not a feeling thing. What do you see when I take him or her away from you? If you think we're not a team, watch you fall on your side.
Yeah, 100%. One of the interesting dynamics we have here as well is it's growth and leadership. And as peace officers become supervisors, we have a very large portion of professional staff and civilian managers. But we also have a very large, the higher you go in the organization as a sworn deputy sheriff, as you promote, you start to supervise professional staff. And that's often a big learning curve and part of personal growth and leadership journey for peace officers who are used to working with other peace officers. And like any profession, there's specific cultures, right? And cops are no different. There is a definitely unique culture. And there's a way to be able to lead and get people to follow you when you're trying to lead sworn law enforcement officers. But those techniques and those strategies aren't always effective when you promote, and then you have to lead professional staff. So it is interesting to watch emerging leaders grow and struggle and learn those lessons as they advance up the organization.
Yeah, and then you're listening for, I'll just make it clear, I'm listening for also not born, not sworn is not going to fly here. So don't say it, don't think it, we'll catch it, we're looking for it.
Right.
Because we can't have it. It's deleterious to our mission. We appreciate your time. If you like what you've heard so far, do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and share with your friends. We'll be right back. The law firm of Scholes, Brick & Rogaski is a go-to partner for me. I work the most with partner Michael Rogaski. I go to them for business contracts, strategic legal counsel to maneuver through or around complex business situations, HR and employee issues, startup needs, intellectual property protections, collection matters, and recently the purchase or sale of a business. I really like the fact they tell me if they're not the best fit and they give me a warm referral if I need it. Also, unlike so many attorneys, are totally level-headed and calm. I've experienced it like their slogan says, small firm service, large firm result. Contact Michael Rogaski at sbrlawsd.com. Kathy Olson at Ships and Trips is as creative and as willing a travel partner as you can find. These days, you can plan a lot of trips on your own, but for those trips that require more intricate planning, tons of time, or local contacts and savvy, Kathy's the best. My family and friends have worked with her countless times in every travel country, setting, and season you can think of. Contact Kathy with a C at shipsandtripstravel.com. Let's stay on this diversity topic for a minute, as long as we're on the topic. Comment on why it's so important, assuming you think it is, Sheriff, for more women to join the leadership ranks in law enforcement.
No, it's extremely important. Well, I would say it's important for women to just join the ranks of law enforcement, period, right? I think there's not only are we been suffering the last few years in a recruitment crisis in our profession, but we've definitely seen it with women going into our profession. You know, I think nationally, maybe 12% of the ranks are made up by women, and maybe 3% of management team is women in law enforcement. You know, there's an initiative right now called 30 by 30, trying to get 30% of the recruits and hires being women by the year 2030. It's a nationwide campaign. And there's proven facts and studies that show that communities, when they deal with women law enforcement officers, they perceive them as more trustworthy, more honest. Females in law enforcement use less force. The sexual assault victims connect better, and they do better investigations. And the list goes on and on. And in our agency, probably very similar to many others, over 60% of my professional staff are women. So we have a large portion of our staff are women's, which makes it extremely important that they're represented up at the management and executive ranks, not to mention their perspectives on things, their differences in opinions that we don't want to miss and we want to catch. But I think the problem is in law enforcement also, it's a male-dominated profession. And so women unfairly, I think, have the cards stacked against them the day they start. I've always said that a male law enforcement officer starts his career and it's almost assumed he can do the job. And unfortunately, there's a culture where when a woman starts, they have to prove or make their bones that they can do the job on the streets with their peers and gain credibility in the locker room, so to speak. My spouse is a retired law enforcement officer. She worked for 3 different organizations, large, medium, and small law enforcement agencies. So I've seen it firsthand, the struggles and the difficulties that women in this profession have of not just gaining credibility, but advancing, through the ranks and becoming leaders.
Well, you're here and while I'm here, let's be allies. Everything you said is really important. I like to see men also step up. You talked about some of the places where women do better in law enforcement, and some of them are use of force, along those lines. Come on, male officers, step up, do better. And then let's get more women in law enforcement. Great point, not just leadership. Let's get more women in law enforcement, period. And let's also get more women in leadership in law enforcement.
Yeah, it's extremely important to our profession, and I think the future of our profession. And honestly, we have an image crisis in our profession right now that we're trying to overcome, and I think this is also one of the ways to help us do that.
Let's stay on this trajectory of getting to more and more detail. You've had just about every job in the agency. You worked your way all the way up in these 34 years, 32 of them in Placer and 2 at tiny Lake County, just up the way. Year over year, assignment over assignment, you worked your way up. What'd you learn as you moved up that you didn't know then? And what are some of the things that you would tell your young sergeants, for example, starting their leadership journey, their leadership development journey?
Oh, man. I've learned so many things. Unfortunately, most of them were by skinning my knees and making mistakes.
Yeah, look at the look on my face. Me too, obviously.
Yeah, I think, first of all, as I look back, I couldn't be more blessed and thankful. I had a chance to do so many fun things, and I've had such the rewarding career. And honestly, I can honestly say I had a chance to do anything I ever wanted to do within this organization. And I'm so thankful for that. And now, being in the position of sheriff, I'm just blessed and humbled and honored every day. I think if I reflect back, man, I don't know that I always, even starting as a sergeant, that I always saw the bigger picture. I would encourage anybody, whether it's in law enforcement or the private sector, to, a saying that resonates with me is a high visual horizon. We that's what we call it when we do EVOC, or emergency vehicle driving. Officers in a pursuit, they get tunnel vision. They focus on the suspect's car and they miss what's going on in traffic. So we constantly reinforce high visual horizon to raise their eyes and see the bigger picture. We also use the term gaining some altitude, look at the bigger picture. And I think if I look back, a lot of the mistakes I made and wished I hadn't, it was because I had a very narrow view, maybe, of the organization, our mission as a whole, based off of if I was the sergeant over our special operations unit. That was my world. That's all I thought that mattered. I thought we were the most important thing to the mission of the sheriff's office. And you can lose perspective that way. The more you can think and make decisions at the level above you, the better you'll be. So, I tell people all the time when they ask what I'm looking for in a good deputy sheriff that'll be a good sergeant, I say one that already thinks and acts like a sergeant. True all the way up the chain of command.
So how do you do that? One of the things I used to say in that regard is I really need you to think outside the box. And then I'd say it again and I'd say it 2 months later. And at some point I realized I'm not getting any fidelity here. There's no stickiness to what I'm saying. So I started using examples. How do you gain that altitude? How do you get that perspective when you don't have it naturally in your job?
Yeah, I think it's tough. It's really easier said than done, right? Hey, you need to just think more like a lieutenant when you're talking to a sergeant or a first line supervisor. You need to put your management hat on a little bit. I think a little bit of it is, providing examples. I try to tell people, especially at the sergeant level, the way our law enforcement is, you're probably a little more staff centric. And maybe a lot of the leadership principles that work in the military are more effective. But as you advance to the management ranks, maybe those aren't as effective anymore, right? And your job is not just to be as focused on the well-being of your team and your employees, but all of your decisions are now balancing the needs of the organization with the needs of the employees and trying to get that balance as close as possible. And you're never going to get it perfect. And sometimes one is going to outweigh the other. So using examples like that, but then really, I think utilizing mentoring, I think it's very important to foster a culture of mentoring and leadership training and really prepare that next generation of leaders before they're leaders.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about mentors and you brought it up. I'm really glad you did bring it up. And then probative questions, because like asking, hey, what's going on? How's it going? That's not going to get it there. You have to know what you're trying to solve for and ask probative questions to put your mentor in a good space to help you with what you actually need help with.
Right.
Tell me how you use mentors. If you want to name names, that's great. But talk to me about the role of mentors in your life, positive and negative.
Oh, yes. I've had both, like I'm sure we all have, right? But I would say, I'm sure everybody that if you've been in management or supervision long enough, you've learned just as much from a bad supervisor as you've had from a good one, right?
Yes, sir.
I continue to use mentors. I think one of the keys to my success is not just, some of the work ethic and things I learned from my father, but I really do have a high work ethic, but more importantly, I think a thirst for knowledge, and I'm a lifelong learner. Feel like I stay very humble, holding the role of sheriff, maybe to a fault, maybe a little imposter syndrome creeps in every now and then. So, I don't think I never feel like I know it all. And I've always utilized mentors, people that previous sheriffs, and I've learned a lot from those above me and very close mentors. I probably have 5 or 6 I could name by name right now through different ranks and eras of my career that really I owe where I sit today because of those people. That's how much impact I feel like they had on me.
I like that you're utilizing mentors to this day. I am too. I'm top of my field. So are you. I have phone a friends. You bet I have phone a friends for pricing, for temperament, for like, hey, how would you handle this? I want to run the scenario by you. Once you decide you have it all figured out, I don't know about you. Actually, well, I do know about you and some of your colleagues, but just successful people in general, private, public, elected, otherwise, there's a huge percentage of people that once they get that card and that promotion, they're done. They figured it out. Kind of like I got my master's, I'm good now. I really like you saying, including to others, our show, Sheriff, is leaders and emerging leaders, and the emerging leaders should listen to that. I mean, Sheriff's top of his career, 50-something years old. There's really nowhere to go from where you are now. Lifelong learner, humble. I like imposter syndrome. There's growing evidence, at least growing literature, opinions around really imposter syndrome being a positive, not a negative. It takes successful people. It has a element of humility, and then you study harder, you work harder, you prepare more. You mentioned yesterday that you were nervous or intimidated for this interview, and I said to you, "Me too. I feel the same way. I got up an extra hour early today, went back through my notes, paced the hallway a little bit. I take this stuff seriously. I don't want to be an imposter, and I'm humble enough to know, like, I don't just roll out of bed and do this stuff. I can screw it up any given moment. I like the humility quite a bit, to be honest with you.
I can say this, I'm never comfortable. I'm never comfortable. And that's a philosophy that I think it was been a key to my success, and that I would say to, if you want to be a successful leader. And if I look back at different times my leadership journey, where I've probably fallen down or failed the men and women below me, it was because I was comfortable. I got comfortable in my position. I got comfortable as a leader in the organization. I got comfortable with the technical aspects of that position I was in. And I think that's when I failed. I tried to always, in a weird way, be uncomfortable and not satisfied, and always try to learn and grow, and do better. I'm always self-reflecting and trying to find areas where I can improve and do better.
You asked me, like, why'd you choose me? This is why. These are some of the reasons why. I've worked with so many know-it-alls in my political and business life. Those who are at the top, who are humble, and Adam Grant talks about in hidden potential. He's a famous sociologist who works in the workforce space and making better teams and better workplaces. He talks about the highest level you can get to hidden potential is once you get there, he or she who adjusts the best, who changes the most, who can realize they were wrong the quickest, who can get the input. That's where the win is. You already got to this spot, but the next level of hidden potential is in your ability to adjust.
Yeah, and I think, for me, the role of sheriff is just so unique and different. If you looked at I'm an elected official, but if you look at a lot of elected officials around the state of California, or even in our government system, they're elected and they represent a constituency. I do that, but I'm also running an organization of almost $200 million and over 700 employees. So you're electing somebody to represent you in a way, but not as a assemblyman or a senator to lobby for you. You're also electing a CEO in many ways. And then you have not just having to run an organization, you have being an elected official and all the community and external demands that come with that, and the politics, quite frankly. And that has been where I've really had to leverage a lot of mentors. I will freely admit that the politics is the least favorite part of my job, and probably the part I'm the worst at, and where I need the most guidance and mentorship sometimes.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm really interested in the fact that you had all these jobs coming up the ranks, which is not uncommon. I mean, again, back to, we've both been bouncing back and forth between public sector and private sectors. There's a lot of analogies, and it is interesting. It's somebody that started off, I'm just going to say sales for a company, right? And they moved all the way up into I would say you're the president and probably the CAO, or the county's the CEO, but you're arguably, if the organization's on its own, the CEO, but you've had all these jobs, and now you have a number two, a very talented number two by the name of Shane Wright, helping you run the show. How do you adjust, and what do you have to account for the dynamic with your captains who could be VPs, and now a new undersheriff who could be like, say the CFO or the CAO? You've had these jobs. What happens when you think that's not how I would have done it when I had that job, and how do you stay out of it and keep them in their genius?
I think that's a personal struggle, right? You want to be a mentor without being a micromanager. To your point, one of the things that I think has benefited me the most has been my tenure. The fact that I'm still here after 34 years. And I think one of the things that I'm proud of, but I also think is a key to my success, and I never did it intentionally, but I held every rank in the organization for over 5 years. So I have a pretty deep breadth of knowledge of how the entire organization functions, along with being old gives me a lot of historical perspective, right?
You can't be old because I'm not old, so I'm not going to let you be old.
For a law enforcement organization, I am
Fair enough.
in this profession. So it's been an interesting journey. I'm trying to learn how to be the sheriff over the last couple of years, while my undersheriff maybe didn't get to spend 5 years at every rank of the organization and get that breadth of knowledge. So it's always a balancing act of trying to mentor and guide, but also giving him enough rope and leeway to develop his own style, and develop his own leadership, one of the things that I've tried to do really is and give him a lot of autonomy, especially in the beginning. As the undersheriff, I led that captain corps for almost 6 years. And a lot of them I led when I was their captain. So some of these people on that team, they have worked for me for 15, 20 years. Their whole careers have been working for me as we've all advanced up through the organization. So I thought it was really important to really completely back out optically on a lot of things and not undermine the undersheriff's authority and his ability to establish himself as the new team captain, so to speak, right? He's the new leader. And so tried to mentor behind the scenes, but also let him make his own decisions and let him lead in a way that might be different than my way. And, within the first year, I did that. There's some issues were very hard. And if it was going to be a small mistake, I would let it happen. But, I'm pleased to say that he's extremely bright. And it was very rewarding to watch him do things that honestly, I thought he did better than me. And so by staying out of it, I watched him be able to spread his wings and bring in some things that I had never thought of. So hopefully we're making a good team. We're still learning. We're only a couple years into this thing, but it's a process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point where you went at the end. It is a process. I mean, were you or is anybody as good at their big job in year 1 or 1.5 or 2 as you are in year 4, 5, or 6 or beyond? Of course not. Of course not. I'm also interested in the part you said. I've had this experience where I start to tense up and I start to like pull at my wrist, and like right now I'm pulling at my legs because I know you're making a mistake. It's not how I would have done it. And then over time it worked out and I go, oh man, that was actually better than I would have done it. Did I just get smarter? Did we just get better? It could shake my confidence here and there, but I've had people come up behind me who shall remain nameless, who are listening and know who they are, who are straight up better than me. And I didn't realize it until we were a couple years in where I go, I got to get up here because they don't need me down there. They're better at this than I ever was. And it wasn't year 1. It wasn't year 2. But boy, I'll tell you what, by year 3 and year 4, I had beads of sweat on my forehead because I was taking notes, learning, not leading in some of these meetings.
Yeah, there are a couple of examples of some initiatives that the undersheriff has brought in, and he pitched them to me, and I'm like, and honestly, I flat out told him I would never do that. But if you think this will pay dividends, I'm going to let you run with it. And he knocked it out of the park, home run, and I had to go back to him afterwards and tell him how proud I was, what a great job he did, and how I had a blind spot. Honestly, I would have never thought to have done that in a million years. And, it just reinforced for me how much better we are as a team. And especially as the sheriff now, how much we need to continue to rely on not just the undersheriff, but the assistant sheriff and that captain corps that you talked about, just the whole executive management team as a whole.
Yeah, if you've worked with me at all, I care about team sport more than anything else. And it's a feeling, but it's also facts. It's how we handle our business, how we ask questions, how we handle disagreements, how we brief our teams once we lead these leadership groups, because we do not always get our way. No matter how good the argument is, you lose a lot in these budget meetings. There's a lot of pressures in these divisions, whether it's public or private. So, that's where high performance leadership teams are made in those meetings, with your realization that the undersheriff brings a lot to me, the captains bring a lot to him. And at the end of the day, we're a team and we are not going to win it all. So whether it's public, private, whatever it is, if you're working in a leadership group, this is a masterclass, at least the way you're describing it. And you don't have it all figured out, which I love. I love a leader who doesn't have it all figured out. You're not professing to have it all figured out. So let's talk about working with your board and CEO. Partners or foes, Wayne? Whether private sector or public sector, most agencies and companies at a certain size have a board of directors, equity partners, or in your case, an independently elected board of supervisors. How do you think about your relationship with your board and the executive branch?
Oh, 100% partners. I would honestly say probably one of the biggest leadership lessons I've learned over my career, specifically started to get it as a captain, really as an undersheriff, and now as a sheriff, whether it's public, private, whatever sector you're a leader in, I cannot stress enough the importance of relationships and relationship building. Honestly, everything gets done with relationships, and being able to have conversations and healthy conversations, regardless whether you agree or disagree. But I would say my board of supervisors is 100% a partner. Same with the county executive and the county executive's office. The sheriff's in a unique spot, as you know, Where as a constitutionally elected officer in the state of California, technically I work for the people of my community. I don't report to the county executive officer or the city council like maybe a police chief would, but they are 100% partners, and they are a key to my success. And honestly, they can't be successful without me, and I can't be successful without them.
And it doesn't mean you agree all the time, right? I mean, there can be a healthy tension in it.
100%.
I mean, maybe I shouldn't state that as a leading question. I mean, does it always have to be kumbaya? Do we always have to be on the same page? Is there room for fighting or healthy tension in there?
There has to be. It's not realistic to always be kumbaya, right? As much as I would always like to get what I want, I do understand that there's more to county government than just the office of the sheriff. There's a lot of responsibilities that the board of supervisors have on their plate, and the pie can only be sliced so many ways, in regards to, let's just say, the budget. But having those relationships, being able to communicate, have those healthy debates, it's critical. It's critical. And I would argue you have to have those relationships, and then you have to be able to, like you said, have those healthy debates. But I think during those healthy debates, you need to be successful at making persuasive arguments. And I think the biggest way to do that is to be really good at storytelling. If you want to influence your board, whether it's a board of directors or a board of supervisors, one, to start off, you have to have the relationship. And then two, I think you have to be a very good storyteller and not be afraid to tell the story, positive or negative, when you're trying to lobby for a position, right?
We appreciate your time. If you like what you've heard so far, do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and share with your friends. We'll be right back. Three Bridges Consulting did the video on the recently rebranded NickWarnerConsulting.com. I really love the video because it helps me sell by speaking directly to my prospective clients. Dennis and Sean at Three Bridges Consulting are high-level storytellers for the purpose of helping my prospective coaching clients understand what differentiates me from the pack. A recent new coaching client literally said to me, "You don't need to sell me, Nick. Your video sold me. I understand what you do and how you work with me as a client." That is a true story. You know I love that. Contact 3BC at threebridgesconsulting.co. Gene Hiller Menswear is the finest menswear store I have found. Owner Tom Gangitano and his highly trained team understand I care a lot about my brand, and I need a partner who understands why it matters and has the skill set and product to put me in a winning position in front of my valued clients. But where the heck can I shop other than Nordstrom? I just told you, Gene Hiller Sausalito or GeneHillerMenswear.com. People talk about relationships, and I think they think about you as an elected official, not you specifically, Sheriff Wayne Wu, but you in an elected spot, or me as a former lobbyist, and they think about like backslapping and cigars and martinis and fundraisers, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trust. Like is helpful. I love when we can like, but I don't like everybody I trust or that trusts me. Most people, but not all. But it's the trust you're after, correct?
100%. It's the trust you're after, and you gain it over time. You gain it over, proven decisions and proving that you're trustworthy. You gain it over time of building that relationship, of communicating with these people when you don't need something from them, just reaching out. When you mentioned that's my ultimate goal, right? I have a mentor of mine once, he repeats it often to me as a learning lesson and says, it's a lot harder to say no to somebody you like. Your goal is to make these relationships and have them like you. You want to earn their trust, but you also want to be liked if you want to be successful.
Somebody once told me, I can't believe you have this breakfast with these labor leaders which is a foreshadowing, by the way, of where I'm going next. They're crazy. They're so mean, and they're always after you because it's really hard to screw somebody over when you eat bacon and eggs with them once a week and hear about their families.
Mm-hmm.
I do it because it works and it's better that way. I'm like, I'll probably never forget that as long as I live. Bacon and eggs, super helpful.
Yeah.
It's in that same space. Talk about labor relations, if you would. Friend or foe again. Should leaders think about their relationships with labor unions who represent the same employees you are charged with leading? Is, again, in that partner space, friend space, foe space? How does it work? And I know it's not one thing, but what are some of your thoughts on that relationship?
Extremely important as well. Partner as well. I would classify him as a friend. Now, there can be an adversarial relationship, especially for us. the negotiation aspect for contracts and pay is done through the county executive and the board of supervisors, but we have the discipline side, where it's more adversarial. But definitely friend, and I would honestly say 98% of the time we're on the same page. As the executive, I want a healthy, happy workforce, right? But we want the same thing for the rank and file. It's that very minimal 2 or 3% that at times we're often at odds, because we have to look out, like I said earlier, balance that needs of the organization with the needs of the employees, and needs of the organization has to prevail in this instance. But definite ally, friend, and partner in order to have a healthy and happy workforce. Really, we all want the same thing. Usually when they bring something up to me, I haven't heard about it, and very rarely do I disagree. Like, yeah, that's not okay. I can't believe that's even happening. One of the things that I do is I meet with all of my labor groups regularly. Like every other month, we have standing meetings with all of them. And the goal is to get to the point where we're just chit chatting and really have no issues. And honestly, over the last 2 years, it's gone from a laundry list of things to maybe 1 or 2 items get brought up when we have these meetings. So I think it's extremely important for the health of the entire organization.
Yeah. So I think part of that is about your labor organization or labor organizations. And some of that I'm going to say should be advice to leaders, whether public, private, big government, smaller government, is if you can get to a partnership position with your labor organizations, and very much so with your board of directors, board of supervisors, CEO, your life is going to be better. It doesn't mean do what they say. It doesn't mean they get you over a barrel. It doesn't mean our primary goal is to be buddies, but they are partners. And I am really adept at picking out one contract CEOs or C-suite, 1 and 2 term elected officials. And it's almost always in this space of lack of peripheral vision. You mentioned one of the things that I think is really smart. He says, I'm not the only interest in the county. We're the biggest general fund contributor, or biggest probably responsibility of county government, you could argue, is public safety, city also. But having the vision for the DA, the probation chief, social services, HR, the board of supervisors, don't ask them things that they can't say yes to. That's a really good way to erode trust, because most of them will try to help you if you put them in position. But operating in a vacuum is not a good way to make friends or operate in a larger context. So I really applaud you for your thought on that. I want to stay on key people or key positions as we get into the fourth quarter here, because whether public or private organization, one of the most important positions in that executive suite, or C-suite as they call it in business, is the empowered executive assistant. You have Valerie McGuire, one of the unquestioned best in the industry, and she's an empowered player in your agency. How do you think about the role of executive assistants for yourself and for other executives up and down your agency and others?
Oh, I couldn't be successful without her. And I think any executive should feel that way. 100% partner, probably for me, just as integral as having my undersheriff, honestly. And I think I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to where she worked for me when I was the undersheriff. And you want to talk about a force multiplier, you want to talk about efficiencies and trying to, whether it's have work-life balance, or I'm sure as any executive will say, and I say it all the time, man, I don't get to spend enough time with the rank and file. I need to get out of my office more. I need to do more things. The executive assistant is a key to being successful and being able to do those other things, have a work-life balance, spend more time with the rank and file and staff, because over time, empowered, I would say 99% of the time, she knows exactly how I would answer a question, what my preference will be. So whether I'm in the office or out of the office, I would say I've watched her develop and grow, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that as a professional staff, I have 25, 30-year captains that come to her. She's almost become a mentor in the organization for the way that they should operate or what my expectations would be in my absence. And it's really been extremely helpful.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I'm a big fan of that position. I happen to be a big fan of Valerie's, but I'm a big fan of that position, being empowered. And the more you tell you're really smart, professionalized executive assistant, the better he or she can serve you. I don't think it's not really for me to clean up your words. But I'm going to. I don't think she's almost a mentor. I think she's a mentor without question to you, to me, to others in the organization. And frankly, I applaud you for the way you but partner with your executive assistant. I think it's really important. I think people can learn a lot from it. Can I switch gears to something a little more serious, a little more difficult? You told me Nothing was off limits. The goal here is to learn. And I told you I wanted to bring up a high profile inmate escape you had, but in a different context. The context is, and I wrote a lot about this for my show notes, but I'm not using them because it was cathartic for me to write it, but I'm just going to speak it, which is I haven't had an inmate escape because I've never run a jail or a sheriff's office, turns
It's
out,
not fun.
but I've had, you just told us it was fun. Parts of it are fun. But I've had a high profile miss. I'm sure I've had several, but one that still to this day, 15 years later, keeps me up. I won't bore you with my 3 pages of notes I wrote, but there was a bill. I used to be a high profile lobbyist, as you know, for sheriffs and for other groups. And I ran a firm for 25 years and I'm now obviously in a different profession, but I got a call late in October that, hey, last night they amended a bill on the Senate floor that takes a court filing fee and redirects tens of millions of dollars away from the organizations you represent and to the county general fund. For my business, Sheriff, that was tantamount to an inmate escape. The only difference was nobody was in immediate danger. It was horrific. It was super stressful. And what we decided to do was, I think, a version of what you decided to do. We owned it. We discussed it. We came up with new policies and redundancies for it. And then we fought our way back so it never would happen again. During a very tense time for you, when you had a high profile felon escape from custody and get dangerously back into the community, I think you did some similar version. Your statements indicated contrition and you were expressly apologetic. One of your top captains said it was, quote, humbling. You took full and unconditional responsibility in a way that spoke to regular people, and you also assuaged the concerns and sensitivities of your teammates in the county, to your previous point. During that very tense time, the Board of Supervisors said in a public statement, quote, Sheriff Wu, the board has full confidence in your ability to get to the bottom of these incidents, and we want to thank you and your staff for all the hard work over these past several days. You said sorry in detail and then gave them a roadmap for how this doesn't happen again. Thoughts, comments? It really gets my attention. I got to tell you, because most people come up with a PR spin or plan or way to not take full unconditional responsibility.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a little PTSD just talking about it and hearing you tell the story. It was probably, I'd been in office maybe just to close it in on my first year. It was probably the most, I think we have a 900 capacity jail. We have 2 jails here in Placer County. By far, the most high profile inmate I had in custody. He had obviously planned this and was able to get sent out to the hospital. He'd been there for 2 or 3 days and he was able to walk away and leave the hospital when a deputy had left him unattended briefly. This gentleman had killed somebody in the community. He'd shot a police officer. He was by far the most high profile, worst inmate we could have ever had escape. And I can remember, for a couple of days sitting in a room with my undersheriff and just out of the blue, like, how could this, how did with this inmate of all inmates, right? But it was a decision, I think, that was made right from the beginning. I mean, there was, on one hand, I believe it's just the way I think that our culture of our organization and the way I feel as maybe the leader of this organization. I get a lot of comments about the press conference and what I said. And when I said this was 100% my responsibility, and I apologize, I hadn't prepared to say that. I wasn't really prepared so much for that question, so to speak. But I think it's truly the way I felt as the sheriff. And I think any leader of an organization, if you don't get to the top of that organization and feel 1,000 pounds of pressure on your shoulders because you're carrying the weight and the responsibility, then you shouldn't be in that position. And that's how I felt that day. You can always delegate the authority to do something, but you can't delegate the responsibility. And as a sheriff, statutorily, I was responsible for safe care and custody of inmates in Placer County. And the worst inmate could have possibly escaped. And at the end of the day, regardless of the fault at the deputy, the fault on our organization, the fault our policies hadn't been changed in decades, I was the guy at the top. And at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to keep those inmates in custody. And I had to own that. And I did. And I'd love to tell you that, that was strategized in the boardroom and with our PR team. And it really wasn't. And maybe that's why it resonated so well, was because I think it was genuine and it's truly how I felt. And I think how we felt as an organization and a leadership team and how I felt as the sheriff. But I think it was critical. You talked about trust earlier, and I think it was critical to earn that trust back. It was a black eye for our organization and not our finest day. And I'm extremely proud to be the sheriff here and proud of the men and women that work here. But at the end of the day, they are human beings. But we do make mistakes. Unfortunately, in our line of work, we're not allowed to make mistakes, but they do happen. And I think when they happen, regardless if it's the private sector or public sector, your best way forward is to acknowledge those mistakes in our profession, acknowledge them publicly. But like what you touched on is, all right, we're going to do a deep dive and we're going to figure out how this is never going to happen again. And we're going to make changes and we're going to earn that trust back by owning it and saying we're going to fix it, not continue to erode trust by making up excuses or trying to sweep it under the rug or something like that. Or honestly, the sheriff's an elected official and you could have easily thrown somebody else under the bus and this is all that deputy's fault and he's going to get fired. But as we looked into it, I very quickly realized that the organization owned a lot of this as well with old policies and procedures. We were going through a lot of growing pains from being a small to medium-sized county to now we're pretty much a large-sized county. And there were growing pains as an organization that came with that. And so I think we had to own part of it as well.
Yeah, a lot of respect for that. Most mistakes won't be this big or have this big potential consequences, which thankfully it didn't in the end. But the leadership lessons because it's about trust. It's not just about getting through. It's about trust following you through. And I think that's how trust follows you through. Let me switch gears as we get into the very end here. What role has your family played in your life and career, especially in this elevated chapter, Sheriff?
Couldn't do it without them, honestly. My wife is the most patient person around, the oversheriff, I call her. She's the most patient person around, and I'm constantly trying to find that work-life balance. And she's a great wingman, wingwoman. There's a lot of demands on my time during the day, obviously, but as an elected official and being the sheriff, there's a lot of demands on my time externally in the evenings and on the weekends. And I would say 90% of the time, whether she wants to or not, I know she doesn't probably want to. She leaves the house and from the comfort of her home in the evening and she goes with me to these events. It's definitely a partnership. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my wife. She's definitely the smarter one of the group.
Well, I'll let you guys argue that.
She's the brains of the operation, that's for sure.
And you mentioned the energy that your kids and grandkids bring you too. I appreciate hearing that. 6 months ago, you and your team engaged me to coach and consult you and your team as relates to leadership development and high performance team training. At your high acuity and high level of success, why coaching?
Well, one, we could always get better. We talked about all that. But I think for me, and perhaps it's this way in the private sector too, I think law enforcement has failed. If I look back at my 34 years, I think we have failed in the mission of management and executive level leadership. Most police and sheriff's offices are run, and the top of the organization is sworn staff, police officers, deputy sheriffs. You're talking about people that have 20, sometimes 25 years of knowing how to be a cop, and then you put them in charge of a giant corporation, in our case, a $200 million operation. Some division commanders might be responsible for a $70 billion budget with zero executive experience, right? You go to a post management school, to learn leadership, but this is where to go full circle to the beginning of our conversation. I think this is the space where government can learn a lot from the private business sector. When you're getting to the point of executive level leadership and you're taking career law enforcement officers, there's a lot to be learned from the private sector to be successful at that division commander, undersheriff, sheriff, chief of police, assistant chief levels. And I think that's where, as a profession, we've failed to provide adequate training and resources and give people the tools they need to be successful. And perhaps a little bit of a mindset shift as you become an executive leader in any organization, whether it's law enforcement or not. And which is why I thought it was extremely important to embark on that journey to, give our team the tools they need to be successful moving forward.
Well, I love working with your team. I love working with you. I'm so impressed by the emerging leaders that, that I've been availed of and had a chance to meet with and have really high hopes for the leadership team as well. What are you excited about going forward?
Oh, man, there's so much to be excited about. I think the trajectory our organization is on, you can just feel a sense of excitement. Our county as a whole is on a great trajectory. We've got some of the highest quality of life in the state of California. We're one of the fastest growing counties in the state of California. And so obviously with that comes a lot of great benefits, right? I'm not facing budget struggles like some of my neighbors. So that's great. And we're growing. And so not only are we growing as an organization and that's challenging and exciting, but we're adding new positions. So we're growing as a leadership team. And to take the county and the organization to that next level from, like I said, that growing pains of medium to large to now we're really considered nationwide a large law enforcement organization, at the top of, the biggest ones in the United States. It's just super exciting, to lead the men and women of this organization, to represent the citizens of this community during this time of rapid growth, because this is my home. This is my children's home. This is my grandchildren who grow up in this community. And, to try to maintain what we have, which is really special here in Placer County, as we add, 60, 80, 100,000 people over the next decade or two, is going to be a super exciting times.
That's awesome. It's exciting for me to hear about that. Anything I should be asking you about that I haven't asked you about yet?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, with that, I'll say, Sheriff Wu, you did a fantastic job on this podcast. It's been so much fun, so much to learn. Thank you also to our producers, Riley Byrne, Megan Tuck, and Hillary Wade at Podigy Podcast. And also thank you to our research assistant, Alex Warner. Thanks for listening, and see you next month on Together at the Top. Thank you so much for your time. Together at the Top thrives off listeners like you. To stay connected, follow our socials in the show notes and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We will be releasing our show on the last Tuesday of every month. See you next time. At Nick Warner Consulting, we exist to coach and consult motivated professionals. I meet with you on Zoom in focused 90-minute sessions, working toward your goals and developing next-level business skill sets. My job is to add value to your organization and your career. To learn more, visit www.nickwarnerconsulting.com or call me directly at 916-765-3576.